Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Mickey to Donald Magical Adventure 3, brought to us by Capcom. Now, in North America, this game was known as Magical Quest 3 when it was released for the Game Boy Advance, and will be how I refer to it from here on out. It was released late in the Super Famicom life cycle, back in 1995, in December of 95 to be exact, and because of that is probably the reason why Capcom decided not to bring this game to North America. Interestingly enough though, out of the 3 Magical Quest games, I actually do think I like this one the most. You can play 1 or 2 player, and you can play as, of course, Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck. And the big variation to playing as Donald is in all the Magical Quest games you get costumes. I'll be playing as Donald in this run because he kind of gets the short end of the straw here in the game. And he ends up getting these costumes that don't quite fit, aren't quite right exactly, and just aren't overall the best looking costumes. And I think it adds a little bit of humor, and overall makes Donald the funner character to play as in this game. So here we go with Mickey to Donald Magical Adventure 3, Magical Quest 3 for the Super Nintendo. And yes, we are playing a fan-translated version of the game. At the startup screen, you can go to the options menu and change a few settings, mainly just the difficulty, as well as the control settings. We'll be playing on the normal difficulty for this run of the game. You can then start it up and you get to see the opening storyline before you get to select which character you want to play as. After the opening storyline, you then get to select Mickey or Donald, and like I said before, we'll be playing as Donald in this run of the game. Mickey's costumes are pretty traditional for the other Magical Quest games, so they really aren't too much of a change, so playing as Donald just adds that little bit of extra comedy that I think makes this game great. The first level of the game is the Town Harvest Fair. It introduces you to the main mechanics of the game, getting you used to how you pick up boxes and use them for your main weapons in the game. As you start off, of course, you don't have a costume to change into, so you jump on enemies in order to make them dizzy, and then you actually can spin them or throw them at other enemies in order to defeat them. You can do the same thing with random boxes you find laying around as well. You gotta love that one of the first enemies we end up fighting in this game is an anthropomorphic corn walking back and forth that you can jump on. Of course, I probably find that more interesting than any because, of course, my name. One of the things that's fun in this game is there actually is a little mini game you can do with selecting cards in order to get upgrades, coins, and other objects. In order to get to the first one though, you have to do a little bit of manipulating with the blocks in order to actually get up there, which is a little bit difficult. We're picking up this block here, and what we have to do with it is we have to throw it on top of this windowsill. Then we can jump onto the boxes to the left and spring ourselves upwards so we can get up to the door in the upper corner. The card game is pretty simple. You select a random card, and then you get random objects, whether it's more apples, more coins, a piece of heart, or you can get an extra life. You can play the game as many times as you want as long as you don't draw the Pete card. It can be really difficult to get the actual vials of heart that you can see at the top of the list here. Getting a certain amount of them will grant you another piece of your heart in your health meter. Thankfully, you can also find pieces of heart to add to your health meter throughout the game, and I'll be grabbing a lot of them throughout this run. After playing the minigame for a certain amount of time until you get bored with it or get the Pete card, we then start continuing on, watching out for more corn enemies as well as crows that actually will fly overhead that you'll have to avoid as well. At the end of the first area, you go to the second area, and here things change up a little bit. You actually have a boat on a canal that you can actually ride across, or you can just skip the boat since it moves rather slowly and just jump headfirst into the water itself, which is what I'll be doing. Just be careful, of course, while doing this, that you watch out for enemies that can drop objects from the windows, as well as these little tadpole fish that are quite angry at you for being in their water. Over here, we have our first boss battle. This giant chicken can be a little bit of a pain, but the way you deal with him is by picking up boxes and immediately launching at him after he launches out his set of projectiles. If you do it quickly enough, you'll be able to actually prevent him from actually moving anywhere, and after 4 or 5 boxes you end up defeating him, and your reward is actually getting the first of the costumes in the game. The first costume you get is the suit of armor. And of course, it being funny that they don't have armor that fits Donald, so what he ends up getting is a giant barrel over him with a pot on his head, and of course the hammer he still gets as his main weapon. The hammer is of course the most effective weapon we pretty much get in the entire game, and what happens is it charges up, and when it's at its full charge and you hit an object or enemy with it, it does the most damage to it. And we'll be using this costume for most of the boss fights throughout the course of the game. Jump along these broken pillars and boxes until you make it over to the right to another one of the boats. You can then ride the boat if you like to, or just once again jump in the water in order to actually continue on. Make sure that you jump up here and destroy this barrier with your hammer before you're able to continue. Just be careful of a few of the pirates located inside the barrels that will try to fire at you. It's now time for the first real boss battle of the game. This is the end stage boss here. It starts off with 4 crows going down and picking up the giant boss. Our job here to defeat the boss is anytime the crows bring him to the front of the screen, you have to nail him with your hammer. It's pretty easy at first because when you jump up and hit him with the hammer, he flashes, and of course he won't cause you any damage while he's actually flashing. Hit him 6 or so times, and then they end up lowering him, and the boss ends up jumping out and trying to directly attack you now. What you'll have to do is you have to hit him with your hammer, and you cause him to actually fly backwards. Doing your timing correctly, you'll be able to keep him far away from you, and he won't actually jump on top of you when he's springing off of his tail. When you're doing more and more damage to the boss, he will start to change color, indicating that he's getting closer to death. Once you defeat the first boss though, you've also completed the first stage of the game. Stage number 2 is the Fungi Forest. We also get our second costume at the beginning of the stage. Now this is the one that allows us to hook on the trees and climb on them. You can also use the belt that they give you with the costume in order to attack enemies with and hit blocks. I love the animation of Donald when he moves back and forth on one of the trees, and it's a very fluid animation even when he's climbing the trees. You also have to of course love that the outfit doesn't quite fit him, so it's a little bit baggy while he's wearing it. The big change in this level, of course, is that you're going to have to get used to climbing the trees as well as using the zip line between trees in order to travel around. In the next segment, it's time for the mini-boss of this level. Start off by grabbing onto the first tree and you'll see that the screen will actually start to scroll. After a few seconds of doing this, the boss will make its appearance. This butterfly boss will drop pollen from the ceiling as well as below it so you'll have to avoid that as well as its tongue that it spits out. The best strategy I found for it is just bouncing on top of its head and using that to get yourself over to the next tree. Repeat this over and over again to easily take out the boss. After dealing with the boss, you'll be able to continue on in the level. Either jump in the water below or use the trees in order to continue on and make it to the next screen. When you make it here, be sure to watch out for the caterpillars and other bugs that are going to be above you. You'll have to use your belt in order to pull up this tree stump so you can actually jump on top of it to get to the platform above you. Use this tree in order to climb up and grab onto this zip line so you can move over quickly to the right. Just watch out for the enemies on the trees while doing so. If you do it correctly, you'll be able to get up into the upper right corner. Use your hammer ability in order to break this box and you can net yourself 2 extra lives. Over here, there's a nice little secret. Use the hammer in order to break the barrier that's here, and then use the belt in order to pull the stump out of the way so you can actually enter inside the door. Once inside, you'll have to once again switch over to the hammer so you can actually break the box, but you'll grab yourself a large heart that'll give you another piece of heart to your health meter. On the next screen, you'll have to watch out as the screen starts to scroll for a little while, as you'll have to jump from platform to platform, but this is all setting you up for the boss battle here. The giant flower will form in the middle, and you'll have to use the platforms as well as the giant cylinders in the sky in order to hook onto them so you can jump on top of the boss. While it may seem tough at first, watch out for the first set of projectiles and then use them in order to bounce on top of the boss's head. You can then just keep bouncing on the boss's head over and over again in order to easily take out this boss. Just be sure when you take out the boss that you don't accidentally fall into a pit below. Stage number 3 is the Sandy Mountain. So not only are we trying to find our nephews, we're actually trying to find this guy's magic kit throughout this level as well. But don't worry, you get it for just completing the stage. Of course, being Sandy Mountain, there's tons of sand. It's pretty much the desert-themed level of the game. Throughout here, you have a lot of different scorpions, as well as you have enemies that will try to come up from the ground and attack you that way. Just be careful of the groundhog enemies, because they do like to throw rocks at you. It's time to face off with the mini-boss for this level. Pull out the hammer ability and smack him as soon as he jumps on the screen. Then, when he's actually floating his head around, you can actually jump on the head in order to do damage. He'll then reform and you'll have to hit him again with the hammer, and then once he gets broken apart again, do the same thing by jumping on his head. His main form of attack of throwing out his horns like a boomerang are pretty easy to dodge and allow you to just quickly jump over him and smack him with the hammer in order to break him apart. It just takes a little while because of the animations, but overall a pretty easy fight. We now get one of the coolest abilities in the game. The magic lamp ability, when you rub the lamp, will allow you to charge up a fireball that you can then launch at enemies to do pretty good damage, as well as take out lines of blocks. You can only use it a certain amount of times, so you'll have to watch your gauge on it, but it ends up being a pretty effective weapon, especially if you have that and don't feel like using the hammer for close combat. You can use the fireball for far distance combat. Here we can use the magic lamp in order to hit these flowers so that we can then spring off of them in order to get to the platforms above. Go over to the left here and end up breaking this open so you can actually go inside another one of the doors. Here we find one of the shops of the game. All those coins we've been collecting, we can then use the items that we actually have in order to buy objects. The main object that we're going to be buying though is those heart vases. Buying them will allow us to eventually, when we get 4, get another piece of our heart. You also saw in the shop that you can actually buy objects that half the amount of ability that you have to use for the hammer as well as the magic lamp. But unless you have a ton of extra coins left over, I really wouldn't deal with them. Over here, use the magic lamp in order to hit this flower, and then you actually can climb on top of it to get to the platform above. I just love the magic lamp being able to hit a scorpion with a fire tail, and that causes his tail to actually bloom into a flower, and then you can easily jump on top of him. Just like before, we'll have to end up hitting this flower so we can climb on top of it, being careful of the bee enemies that are flying nearby, and then we can actually continue by running over to the right. You'll have to use the magic lamp to hit this flower on the far right so you can then actually jump on top of the platform. Get out the hammer so you can actually break the block above you, so not only can you make it to the next platform, but you also get yourself an extra life. It's now time for the boss battle of the level. Use your giant hammer when he starts to appear in order to hit him in mid-air, as he does an arcing pattern over from the right to the left and the left to the right. Every time he does this, you'll have a good opportunity to at least deliver one hit with the hammer. Eventually he'll stop doing this and come up from the middle, spewing rocks to the left and right. As long as you hang out near the middle yourself and just keep moving away from the actual center, you'll be able to hit him with the hammer when he actually appears from the middle, and be able to send him right back down. Just be careful that you don't get too close to where he's about to jump out, because of course he'll do some damage to you. After a while, he'll actually stop just jumping and sometimes send just his tail out, which of course can damage you since it's just armored spikes. It's now time for level 4, the Airship. You have all your costumes in the game, so now it's really coming down to just mastering them and using them the best ways you can in order to continue on in the game. As we saw at the end of the last level, we have Pete actually having enemies parachute down on you. So this is a large part of the first enemies you'll have to deal with at the beginning of this stage. Also for this level, when you make it to the top here, all the enemies will come parachuting down on you while you're actually jumping up the platforms as the screen slowly scrolls by. Of course, you want to be careful that you don't fall off these platforms and land in the big gap below them. It shouldn't be too difficult, especially with the hammer ability, to stop most of these enemies as they're rising. The enemies inside of crates, though, you actually can hit with the hammer, and then if you want to, you can actually ride on the platform that is then created. However, you won't be able to do that at the very beginning because the screen ends up scrolling too slowly, and you will just jump on the platform and it'll go off screen. However, once you get to this top platform, you'll have to ride along these platforms in order to continue up. Thankfully, you don't have to defeat enemies on all the platforms. Eventually, you'll make it to the top and then jump over to the right in order to enter the giant airship itself. Inside here, watch out for the pot enemies that are sitting around and just waiting for you to get close to them. They have an angry expression on their face, but you can easily shatter them with the hammer. Jump up here in order to hit this giant box in the left corner, so you can end up getting yourself 2 more extra lives. Then, drop down below here and walk on this platform in order to hit the button. Of course, you won't be able to just stand on it in order to continue, so you'll have to actually get out your lumberjack equipment and pull this barrel over to the left and actually have it sit on top of the button so you can actually use it. This is rather annoying because you can only pull one thing at a time, but you'll eventually be able to get it over. For doing so, you actually get access to another one of those hidden doors in the bottom right corner. This is another one that contains one of the bonus games, so you can grab yourself some cards. After unfortunately drawing the Pete card, I continue on in the stage by jumping up here. It's now time for the mini-boss, so switch back over to the barrel and hammer. This boss is a little bit difficult if you don't know how to defeat him, but the way to do so is by actually using the barrel to your advantage. When he jumps nearby you, you'll actually have to duck down as the barrel and allow one of the cannonballs he shoots out in order to bounce off your helmet and run right back into him in order to do damage. Just be sure to be a step or so away from him every time he lands so you can easily reflect back his cannon shots. It's a pretty long battle, but eventually you'll be able to move on to the next screen of the level. In the next area, you'll have a lot of the pirate enemies trying to attack you, but just take the upper path by jumping on the random boxes, so you can easily just jump over and avoid most of them. Eventually, you'll have to jump on top of this pole and actually use your lumberjack ability in order to climb up it. Watch out for the enemies that will try to parachute down as you work your way up to the top. When you make it all the way to the very top, use the zip line on the right in order to fly over to the right, and you'll find yourself another one of those hidden doors. Inside here is another one of the shops, so if you have the coins, be sure to grab the pieces of heart. Here we now have 4 pieces of heart, so we're able to actually get another piece of our total health. Now we're up to 6 total hearts in our health meter. After grabbing that, you can jump down to the bottom right and move on to the next screen. It's now time for the boss battle of the level. Pull out the armored suit with the hammer and then wait for the boss to jump down. Use your hammer in order to smack him on top of his head. He'll then fly up into the air and try to do a kick at you. Just be sure to stand pretty much right underneath of him so you can easily avoid the kick, and eventually he'll also fire out his projectiles from his gun, which you can easily duck underneath of him. The only problem is the ship itself will tilt a little bit, causing you to actually fly into him. While this makes the fight a little bit more difficult, overall it's not too bad. Once you defeat the boss though, we move on to the next level. And stage number 5 is, of course, the water-themed level for the game, the Shell Ocean. In this level, not only do you have to worry about your health, but you also have to worry about your oxygen. So you'll have to go inside the giant bubbles in order to replenish it so you don't end up drowning under the water here. Thankfully, just barely touching the bubble is enough in order to refill it, but it does drain rather quickly. You'll also have to deal with a pretty good amount of enemies while also making your way through here, so try to do your best to be careful. But you can always switch to your other costumes still as well, so be sure to do so in order to break open certain blocks. If you do end up running out of oxygen like I did there, you end up losing 1 heart, but then it does refill, so you don't instantly die when you run out of oxygen. Watch out for the pufferfish. Of course, they expand when you get close to them, so they can do some extra damage to you. When you make it to the end of the area, you'll be going inside of this giant shell at the end. Once inside here, you'll notice that it's actually a little bit of air available to you, so you don't have to worry about really drowning during this segment. When you make it over to here, of course, break out the hammer ability so you can break open all these boxes laying around. You'll then have to probably switch to the lumberjack in order to actually jump on top of this cylinder here so you can make it over to the other side. Here you'll have to use the zipline and the cylinder in order to propel yourself up to the upper platform. Then be careful of all the crab enemies that are attached to the giant pillars here as you work your way back over to the left, watching out for the spikes below. If you do a nice timed jump with it, you can actually launch yourself pretty far, and this will help you avoid some of the spikes. Be sure to enter this door over here and grab up all the extra items, including a giant piece of heart to give us another piece of our health meter. Then make your way back through the spikes like we did before, and then you'll end up coming out the top. Once you're outside though, it's time for the boss battle of this level. so break out the hammer ability. The squid enemy will start off by throwing up a tentacle up in the air which you won't be able to damage, but then the whole giant squid will appear so you can easily knock him in the head with the hammer. Watch out for the giant tentacles by jumping over them or just moving to the opposite side of the screen of them, and then prepare the hammer so that when he does appear on screen you'll be able to give him a nice hit. This battle does end up taking a while, but it isn't really too difficult. Eventually he will change colors when he's getting closer to the end of the fight. Next up is stage number 6, the Snowflake Mountain. What classic Capcom platformer wouldn't be complete without a snow level, and this one is actually pretty cool looking. I like the dead trees in the background with the snow on top of them, but for the most part the enemies that you'll be dealing with are similar to ones we dealt with in other levels. Another interesting thing though is when you're walking on the ground with Donald, you end up getting this whole bunch of snow built up with him. Be sure to climb up here on these blocks so you can find yourself a hidden door on the top to play another one of the bonus games. Continue on after we get done with the bonus game. Watch out for the giant gaps here between the platforms. You will slide a little bit on the slant, so be careful when making your jumps. When you make it to the next screen, take out an enemy and then switch over to the lumberjack form so you can end up climbing up this tree. Then jump to the platform on the left and continue your way up. You'll have to do a nicely timed giant jump so you can make yourself get all the way over to the right. Then drop off the right platform to find yourself another hidden door. Inside here is one of the shops, so be sure to pick up both of the sets of heart, and then you can exit out. Just be careful of the snow groundhog type enemies, as they will throw, of course, snowballs at you while you're making your way up, but just keep jumping up the trees and the cylinders until you make it to the top. It's now time for the boss battle of level 6. This giant Yeti enemy will start making his way down from the sky. He has a giant chains that are attached to him. He has two main forms of attack. He'll end up throwing out that chain at you, or he'll spit out a giant tornado at you. You can easily jump over the tornado, and every time you do so, you'll be able to clobber him with the hammer. Eventually, he will throw down the chain that he has wrapped around his wrist, in which case if you stand close to him, it'll just go over your head and miss you altogether. With some nice timing, you'll be able to keep the Yeti on the far left side of the screen the whole time, and just stay close to avoid both the chain and easily jump over the tornadoes. Of course, he will change color when he gets close to death, and once he does so, just be careful that when he does sometimes fly into the air, that you avoid getting squashed by him. Once he's been defeated, we move on to the final level of the game. The final level of the game, level number 7, is King Pete's Palace. You have some of the normal pirate type enemies we've been dealing with, but you also have statues in the background near the beginning that will spit fireballs at you. Be sure to hit this giant block amongst these small blocks so you can grab yourself some extra lives. While working your way up the staircase, watch out for the torches in the background because they will spit out little fireballs that will actually start chasing you. When you make it to the next screen, switch over to the lumberjack form and then start climbing up the pillars. This is probably one of the coolest, but also a little bit difficult areas of this level, as you'll have to make your way up all the pillars, watching out for fireballs and statues along the way. Just be sure that even though the screen is moving slowly, that you don't allow the fireballs to kind of bunch up on you and gang up on you. This is a rather large segment of the stage, but just keep working your way up and eventually the screen will stop, allowing you to jump over to a platform on the right side and continue on. In the next screen, it'll be a haunted hallway and you'll have all these ghost enemies in the background. With the ghosts, when you jump on them, they end up splitting up into smaller ghosts. In order to continue here, you'll have to use your magic lamp in order to hit these pots, which will bring them to life, allowing you to actually ride on the pots. Ride this first one up to the top and enter the door for one last bonus game. When you make it out, attack the pot twice and you'll see his eyes will change direction. This will show you what direction it'll start moving when you jump on it, so send it over to the right so you can actually make it over. Be sure to break this giant block above you here before entering the door for another large heart, adding one more piece of health to us. Then on the next screen, it's time for a rematch against the giant wolf boss that we fought earlier on in the game on the pirate ship. The same strategy applies as last time and is a relatively long battle, but just stay close to him and keep ducking in the barrel form so you can keep launching those cannonballs right back in his direction. After defeating the boss, you can gain some extra supplies from destroying these boxes if you like, or just continue over to the right where we'll run into this wizard for the first time. In the next segment, you'll have more ghosts to deal with. Work your way down to the platforms to this pot on the bottom. This is a little bit tricky, but what you're going to have to do is get the magic lamp to have his eyes downward so that you can jump into him just barely so he'll start moving down. When he starts moving down, you can then fire at him again in order to send him going right. That way you can actually make it to the platform on the right side. After you get done with that room, it's time for another boss fight. Here you'll be rematching against the captain of the pirate ship. Just switch back over to your hammer ability and just defeat him the same way we did before. Since he can't make the screen actually tilt during this fight, it ends up being an even easier fight than it was the first time around. Now it's time to battle the wizard. Use your hammer ability in order to smack him every time that he ends up getting close to you. He will use some potions in order to cause streams of fire to come your direction, which you can easily jump over, thankfully. Because he moves and jumps rather slowly, he isn't too much of a threat when it comes to moving back and forth, and you can keep delivering hit after hit with the hammer. Once he's been defeated, move on to the next screen and it's time for the final boss fight of the game. Giant King Pete will finally make his appearance. In order to do damage to him, attack him when he actually has his ring out, and you'll be able to just barely touch the crown on his head. You have to jump rather high to hit him with the hammer here. So if you accidentally hit him and it doesn't actually do damage, you may just have to jump and time your hit a little bit differently. Just be very careful, he has a couple of different moves he can do to you. He has the little flames that will start slowly walking your direction, which are pretty easy to deal with since you can just hit him one time with the hammer. As well as he sends giant pillars coming down from the sky, which just be sure not to be standing exactly where they're coming down. The little flames themselves will actually destroy the pillar eventually as well. After you get done with the first form, he ends up changing costume and he changes into his second form. Here he has a giant shield as well as a staff. In order to do damage here, bounce on the staff when he sends it out towards you, and then attack him directly on the head. Every so often he'll send a giant explosion out from his helmet that'll cause little fireballs, of course, so he'll land on the ground. More so than the last times he was able to do so. Just easily destroy him or avoid him altogether and continue bouncing on the staff and delivering hits when you can. When you deliver the last hit to Pete, his armor will break and you can sit back and enjoy the ending to Magical Quest 3. After a rather lengthy ending, and a pretty nice one at that, we then have our The End screen, which we see back in the town that we came from. We now have a statue of Mickey and Donald both in their knight forms, as all the members of the town end up rejoicing over it. But with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.